Nestled along the scenic Creek Road, just south of Ojai, California, is an idyllic spot that has offered rest and respite to weary travelers for centuries. But don't let its serene beauty deceive you, for within its peaceful facade lurks a legend as dark and twisted as the gnarled branches are overhead. This is the story of the Char Man. The origins of the Char Man are as varied as the leaves that fall each autumn. Some say it all began with a devastating fire in 1948, a blaze that scorched the earth and blackened the sky. Picture it, flames licking the heavens, smoke curling like the fingers of a malevolent spirit. In one version of the tale, a firefighter is caught in the inferno, his suit melting into his flesh as he burns alive. Another speaks of a father and son trapped by the flames. The father perished, while the son, driven mad by pain and grief, peeled the charred skin from his father's corpse and hung it from a tree before retreating into the dark, smoldering woods. Yet another account tells of a woman trapped inside a burning house, her screams echoing through the night as her husband, badly burned but still breathing, listened helplessly from outside. The flames consumed her, and the man's soul was scorched as surely as his flesh. Despite these dark tales, official reports claim that the fire of 1948 took no lives. But legends, unlike official records, are not bound by facts. The most enduring story told by the locals is of a horrific automobile accident near the infamous Char Man Bridge. It is said that a motorist engulfed in flames fled from his burning car into the woods. Though his body was never found, his spirit, or perhaps something worse, survived. They say the Char Man's appearance is unmistakable, a figure covered in ghastly burns from head to toe, his skin blackened and peeling, wrapped in tattered, charred bandages. Long before you see him, you'll smell the sickening stench of burnt flesh. If you're fortunate, that scent is all you'll encounter. If not, the Char Man may decide your skin is the perfect replacement for his own. For some, this is not a mere tale of terror, but a tempting thrill. Local youths, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration, play a dangerous game on the Char Man Bridge. They stop their cars, step out into the night, and call out, "Help me!" hoping to lure the fiery specter from the trees. Sometimes they claim to see an orange glow flickering in the darkness. Imagine the stillness of the night, the air heavy with anticipation. The wind rustles through the trees, and the creek murmurs softly, its song a counterpoint to the horror that awaits. And then a flicker of light, a scent that turns the stomach, a shadow that moves with unnatural speed. The Char Man is near. So, if you ever find yourself driving down Creek Road late at night, and you see a faint orange glow among the trees, keep your windows up and your foot on the gas. Don't stop, don't linger, and whatever you do, don't call out for help. The Char Man is always listening, always searching for the next unwary soul to join him in his eternal torment. And remember, some comforts come at a price, and some legends are all too real. In the deep woods of Brentwood, New Hampshire, the remnants of an old colonial village stand silent, the air thick with the weight of history and secrets. Among the crumbling foundations and overgrown paths, there is one name that still sends shivers down the spines of locals. Eunice Cole, known to the villagers as Goody Cole. The year was 1656, and Brentwood was a fledgling settlement, its residents struggling to carve out a life amidst the harsh New England wilderness. Goody Cole was an elderly woman, her stooped figure and piercing eyes a familiar sight around the village. She lived alone in a small, weather-beaten cabin at the edge of the forest, shunned by the superstitious townsfolk who whispered of her strange habits and uncanny knowledge. It was a time when fear and suspicion could easily turn deadly, and Goody Cole's solitary existence made her an easy target. When crops failed, livestock sickened, or children fell ill, the whispers grew louder. Fingers pointed in her direction, and accusations of witchcraft began to take root. The fear culminated in 1656, when a terrible storm ravaged Brentwood, leaving homes destroyed and fields flooded. The villagers, desperate for a scapegoat, accused Goody Cole of summoning the storm with her dark powers. She was dragged from her home, her frail body no match for the angry mob. In a hasty trial, the evidence against her was flimsy, but fear outweighed reason. Goody Cole was found guilty of witchcraft and imprisoned. The villagers hoped her punishment would bring peace to their troubled lives, but it seemed to only deepen the shadows that loomed over Brentwood. Years passed, and the memory of Goody Cole's trial began to fade. But in 1673, strange occurrences rekindled the fear. Children went missing, animals were found dead under mysterious circumstances, and an unshakable feeling of dread hung over the village. The elders, remembering the old fears, blamed Goody Cole once more. She had been released from prison, but the villagers' suspicion never waned. It was during this time that young Mary Warren, a girl of 16, began to experience vivid, terrifying dreams. Each night she saw Goody Cole standing at the foot of her bed, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. In these dreams, Goody Cole would whisper ancient incantations, her voice a low, chilling murmur that seeped into Mary's bones. Desperate for help, Mary confided in the village preacher, Reverend Johnson. Reverend Johnson was a stern, God-fearing man who took Mary's visions seriously. He gathered the villagers and led them to Goody Cole's cabin. They found her frail and bedridden, but their fear turned to fury as they dragged her once more to the village square. This time, there would be no trial. The villagers had decided that only her death would end their suffering. Goody Cole was executed at the edge of the forest, her body buried in an unmarked grave. But even in death, the stories of her witchcraft did not end. Some say that her spirit lingered, seeking revenge on those who had wronged her. Decades later, in the early 1800s, Brentwood was a thriving community, the dark days of witch trials a distant memory. But the land where Goody Cole's cabin once stood remained untouched, avoided by all who knew its history. It was said that on certain nights, when the moon hung low and full, her ghost could be seen wandering the forest, her anguished cries echoing through the trees. In 1823, a group of children ventured into the forest on a dare, eager to prove their bravery. They laughed and joked as they approached the clearing where Goody Cole's cabin had stood. But as they neared the center of the clearing, the air grew cold, and an oppressive silence fell over them. One of the boys, Thomas, stumbled upon a flat moss-covered stone. As he brushed it off, he revealed crude markings, a gravestone. Suddenly, a chill ran through the group, and a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. It was an old woman, her form barely visible in the moonlight. The children froze as she began to approach, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. She raised a bony finger and pointed directly at Thomas. The boy felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, and without a word, the children turned and fled back to the village. Thomas never spoke of what he saw that night, but his hair turned white, and he was plagued by nightmares for the rest of his life. The village once again whispered of Goody Cole, her spirit restless and vengeful. To this day, locals warn against venturing into those woods, especially on moonlit nights, for fear of encountering the ghost of the witch who was wronged. The haunting of Goody Cole remains a chilling reminder of the darkness that can fester in the hearts of men, and the spirits that may never find peace. In the heart of Arizona, beyond the bustling towns and the scorching highways, lies a desolate place known as Slaughterhouse Canyon. But to those who know its secrets, it is called Slaughterhouse Canyon, a name that sends shivers down the spine of even the bravest souls. This canyon, with its jagged cliffs and shadowed crevices, holds a legend so chilling that it has woven itself into the very fabric of the land. The story begins in the 1800s, when a small family made their home at the canyon's base. The father, a rugged man with dreams of gold and fortune, would often leave his wife and children to venture into the wilderness, seeking anything that could stave off their hunger and poverty. Each time he left, the canyon seemed to grow a little darker, the silence a little heavier. As the weeks turned into months, and the father's absence stretched longer than ever before, the family's plight grew desperate. The mother, a woman once full of hope, now found herself trapped in a nightmare of starvation and despair. The children's cries for food echoed through the canyon, a haunting refrain that bounced off the rocky walls and returned to them as if the land itself were mocking their suffering. Desperation has a way of warping the mind, of turning hope into madness. One still, suffocating evening, the mother's resolve shattered. The children's screams, once a plea for sustenance, became an unbearable cacophony that tore at her sanity. In a moment of dark clarity, she decided to end their suffering in the only way she could. With tears streaming down her face and a heart heavy with sorrow, she silenced their cries forever. The canyon, now drenched in blood and silence, became her final resting place as she took her own life, leaving the echoes of their tragedy to linger in the air. Years passed, and the legend of Slaughterhouse Canyon grew. Those who dared to venture into its depths spoke of an unbearable weight, an anguish that seeped into their very bones. On nights when the wind was still and the moon cast ghostly shadows on the canyon walls, the echoes of the past could be heard once more. The screams of starving children, the anguished wails of a mother driven to madness, all mingled with the sighing breeze, creating a symphony of sorrow that chilled the heart. Visitors to Slaughterhouse Canyon have reported strange sensations, as if unseen eyes were watching them, as if the very air were thick with grief. Some claim to have seen the ghostly figure of the mother, her face a mask of torment, wandering the canyon in search of her lost children. Others speak of hearing whispers and cries that seem to come from the very rocks themselves, a reminder of the lives lost to desperation and despair. In the quaint town of Willow Hill, where the air was thick with the scent of blooming magnolias and the streets whispered with tales of old, there lived a girl named Lily. She was the sweetest, prettiest girl in town, with a smile that could light up the darkest of days. Every boy in Willow Hill and the surrounding countryside vied for her attention. The local girls watched with envy as Lily gracefully turned down one suitor after another. waiting for the perfect one to capture her heart. Then came Jacob, returning home from university, and Lily was smitten. Jacob, with his charming smile and scholarly demeanor, quickly won her over. The two were inseparable, and it wasn't long before Jacob proposed. Lily, her heart full of joy, accepted without hesitation. As preparations for the wedding commenced, Lily busied herself with choosing the finest fabrics and decorations, envisioning the perfect home she would share with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob found solace in the smoky atmosphere of the local tavern, where he was drawn to Evangeline, the owner's seductive daughter. With her bold eyes and scarlet lips, Evangeline exuded a danger that Jacob found irresistible. His visits to the tavern became more frequent, and his time with Lily grew sparse. Eventually, Lily noticed Jacob's absences and confronted him. Jacob, unable to deny his dalliance, was forced to swear off his visits to the tavern. He returned to Lily's side, but resentment simmered beneath his compliance. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Guests filled the church, the air thick with anticipation. But as the hour grew late, there was no sign of Jacob. A search party was dispatched, and soon it was discovered that Jacob had fled with Evangeline, leaving town just an hour before the ceremony. Lily, radiant in her wedding gown, received the news with a look of disbelief. Her heart seized with a sharp pain, and she clutched her chest, falling lifeless to the floor. The townsfolk mourned deeply as they buried her in her white dress and veil, the image of a bride forever unfulfilled. Jacob and Evangeline, having spent a blissful week at the coast, returned to Willow Hill unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded. Their arrival coincided with the mourners exiting the churchyard, and chaos ensued. Lily's father attacked Jacob in a fit of rage, only to be pulled off by the minister. Both Jacob and Evangeline were disowned by their families on the spot, forced to flee town in disgrace. Years passed, and the scandal faded into memory. But when Jacob's father died, he was to be buried in the same churchyard, not far from Lily's grave. The old stories resurfaced and whispers spread, wondering if Jacob would dare attend the funeral. Clever as always, Jacob waited until nightfall to visit his father's grave. As he knelt by the tombstone pouring out his sorrows, a voice, soft and sweet, called his name.
Jacob, my love.
He looked up, hope fluttering in his chest, only to see a ghostly figure rise from a nearby grave. The apparition wore a tattered white gown and a veil that shrouded her face. Her eyes and lips burned with an eerie yellow fire, and her rotted dress glowed with an unearthly light. It was Lily. Jacob's body went rigid with terror. His hand, trembling, reached out in a futile attempt to ward off the specter. The ghost bride cackled, a sound that echoed through the graveyard, and her cold hand clasped his in a grotesque parody of a lover's touch. The grip was icy and firm, crushing his bones with supernatural strength.
Come to me, Jacob,
the ghost whispered. Through the veil, he saw maggots writhing in her flaming eye sockets.
No, Lily, no!
Jacob screamed, but he couldn't break free. The spectral bride dragged him step by agonizing step towards the church. His hand burned with an icy fire, while the rest of his body shivered uncontrollably. With a final desperate wrench, Jacob tore himself free. The ghost bride shrieked in rage as he stumbled down the church lane and fled into the night.
You're mine, Jacob. If not in this world, then in the next.
The spectral bride's voice howled after him. By the time Jacob reached his room, the fiery pain had spread through his entire body. He rang desperately for the housemaid, begging her to fetch a doctor. Collapsing into bed, he stared at his hand, now blackened and withered. as if scorched. Dark streaks climbed his arm, visibly spreading. Jacob was unconscious when the doctor arrived, and the affliction had already reached his chest and neck. The physician could do nothing. Within 2 days, Jacob was dead. Lily had claimed her groom. At last. On a moonless night, my Uncle Sam found himself walking down an old dirt road that cut through the dense woods near his childhood home. The road was seldom used, blanketed by a thick canopy of trees that made it feel like a tunnel into the unknown. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sounds were the distant hoots of an owl and the crunch of gravel underfoot. As Sam walked, lost in his thoughts, he saw a figure emerging from the darkness ahead. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with a face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Their eyes met, and Sam felt a jolt of unease. The man's eyes were wide with fear, mirroring the apprehension Sam felt rising in his chest. The two men continued walking towards each other, neither willing to break the silence that hung thick between them. As they drew closer, the sky began to darken further. The last remnants of daylight swallowed by the encroaching night. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees looming like silent sentinels. When they were but a few paces apart, Sam noticed something odd. The man's clothes were outdated, as if he had stepped out of a bygone era. His jacket was tattered, his trousers patched and worn. But it was his eyes that unsettled Sam the most, pale, almost colorless, and filled with a terror that seemed all-consuming.
"Good evening,"
Sam said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive stillness. The man nodded, his eyes darting nervously to the surrounding woods.
"Evening,"
he replied, his voice a hoarse whisper. They walked side by side, an uneasy companionship formed by the shared path. The forest grew darker, the trees more gnarled and twisted, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out to snatch at passers-by. The air grew colder, each breath forming a misty cloud in front of their faces. Sam's unease deepened as they walked. He felt as though they were being watched, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling with the sensation of unseen eyes. He glanced at his companion, who seemed even more agitated. The man's hands trembled, and his breath came in short, shallow gasps.
"Why are you so afraid?"
Sam asked, unable to contain his curiosity. The man turned to him, his eyes wide with panic.
"I've seen it,"
he said, his voice barely a whisper.
"The thing that haunts these woods."
Sam felt a chill run down his spine.
"What thing?"
he asked, his voice trembling. The man shook his head, his eyes filled with a haunted look.
"It comes for those who walk this road after dark. A creature not of this world. It feeds on fear, and once it has your scent, it never lets go."
Sam's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard the old stories, tales of a monstrous entity that lurked in the forest, but he had never believed them. Now, in the deepening darkness, with this terrified stranger by his side, those stories seemed all too real. They reached the edge of a clearing, where the moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above. The man stopped abruptly, his eyes fixed on something in the shadows ahead. Sam followed his gaze and saw a shape moving among the trees. It was tall, with long, spindly limbs and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness.
"It's here,"
the man whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Sam's breath caught in his throat as the creature stepped into the faint light. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a grotesque amalgamation of shadow and substance, with eyes that burned like coals. It moved with an unnatural grace, its limbs elongating and contracting as it approached. The man beside him let out a strangled cry and bolted into the woods. Sam wanted to run, but his legs felt like lead, his body frozen in place by sheer terror. The creature turned its gaze on him, and he felt a wave of cold wash over him, seeping into his bones. With a supreme effort, Sam forced himself to move, stumbling backward into the darkness. He could hear the man's screams echoing through the trees, a chilling reminder of what awaited him if he didn't escape. He turned and ran, branches slashing at his face and arms as he tore through the underbrush. He could hear the creature behind him, its footsteps silent, but its presence palpable. A suffocating weight that pressed down on him. Sam didn't stop until he burst out of the woods and into the open field beyond. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his heart hammering in his chest. When he finally dared to look back, the forest was silent and still, the creature nowhere to be seen. But Sam knew it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to wander into its domain. And as he lay there, staring up at the starless sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that he would never truly be free of the terror he had encountered on that lonely dirt road.